Our audio is now live. Okay. Three, two, one. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adbukta.
This is Merps. Welcome to 2018. It is a new year, and we're starting off in the best way possible. Special guest. It's always special, but this is like his fifth, sixth, thousandth time back on the Lightforge. What's up, Shady?
Hey guys, good to be here. Thanks for having me yet again.
No.
Of course. Thank you, thank you. We just had you on stream Friday, right, where you helped pilot us to a 7-win mage. It took a long time, but I thought it was a great sort of appetizer to this podcast where we introduced a lot of sort of, the themes and the style of play that we're going to be talking about today.
Yep. Yeah, I think the deck and the plays were perfect indeed to highlight that. Like the slower, more reactive play style as opposed to trying to tempo out.
Yeah,
It's pretty disgusting.
For those who don't know, this is Shadybunny from F2K. I know we just colloquially introduced him as Shady, but for those who are listening and for some reason don't know Shadybunny, he's on F2K, Infinite Arena player, was on the leaderboards, basically whenever he tries for the month to rack up enough runs, and we featured him on the Lightforge many times. And he's actually recently started this meta report that especially in KNC has gotten a lot of traction, especially once like the offering odds started going all over the place. Like people really needed a place to see like what was actually happening with this crazy meta, and it's been I know it's been very helpful to us, and we've talked about it on the Lightforge previously earlier last month. So thank you for that.
Hey, my pleasure. I'll need to check that episode out for sure. Casually listening to my own stuff. Okay, cool. No, it's been really fun. Like on the meta report, like it needs to be rewritten now, at least partially.
Mm-hmm.
Like the spirit I feel is still fine, but no, we don't see as many hunters right now because they nerfed quite some stuff. But yeah, I think especially the less to drop some more bigger minions, that's still a plus.
Yeah. Actually, Shady, like reading your meta report these days, I'm like, man, they are not making it easy for Shady. Like if they keep on micro adjusting heavily, you might have to rewrite one of these things like every 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, it's like I really do enjoy like the feeling of not knowing everything there is about the meta. I mean, not that I usually know everything, but you know that feeling, right? Where you're like, okay, pick Bone Mirror, pick Skillbane, do the things, right? Whereas now it's really like, okay, I need to test Rogue, I need to like I have no idea where Druid is right now, for instance. I just have nothing at the time. I'm just barely playing some Warrior runs, some Rogue runs.
Mm-hmm.
It's good fun. And they all seem to have some potential at least.
All right. So Adukta, what do you think we should do first in the order? Should we talk about the offering rates, or should we just unleash
Let's talk
Shady?
about the meta. I want to unleash Shady because we left off on the last Lightforge talking about the counter meta, how to counter the counter, how to survive, how to play a little more greedy, just like general concepts of playing not exactly like even control, but just like slow, right? Like in a meta where tempo really doesn't matter nearly as much as it used to. And then we got Shady on our stream, and it was like, oh, we're not playing slow enough. Like, I thought I'd slow down significantly, and I was already slower than Merps. And then Shady comes in, he's like, why don't we do this instead? And I was like, oh, so we're just gonna float 4 mana casually on turn 8. I see. All right, let's do it. And it worked out pretty well, I think, the play. So why don't you talk a bit about there? I think it's a good like stepping point from where we were talking about on the last Lightforge to get like even slower into this meta. Like just what is the difference between card advantage, or I guess resource advantage in general, and tempo in this meta, and how it's shifted like your playstyle and how you viewed the meta in the game?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, a big one is what are we playing against most of the time, right? And Priest is pretty popular right now. It's also really powerful. So, like I can go over like how I play Priest, but I think it's probably better to start on like how to beat Priests, because most of the time you won't be playing a Priest. The the main thing I feel is to realize that you're not trying to outvalue people when you're playing slower, right? You're just trying to have enough stuff to survive all their removal and counters, and then still be able to kill them, and then still be able to pressure them. So it's more about not running. Like I always make this comparison, right? And it's maybe a little weird, but like if the opponent holds off a spear and you run into the spear, like the spear isn't OP, maybe you should just not run into the spear. So what I mean is like people just jam 2-drops into the Potion of Madness, play your board into Scream, play your board into a Dragonfire, etc., right? So if you don't play into it as hard, they can't remove as much with just one card. So I'll routinely just play a bit slower and don't give them the great potion on the Basilisk, or I'll hold back. I'll just have like 2, maybe 3 minions into the Scream. Like I had this the other day where like my turn 8, I just like hero powered and I could have dropped the Violet Worm. I'm just like, I don't need to play this Violet Worm into a potential Scream. And then he did Scream, and then I just played the Worm, and then he's like, okay, well, I can't deal with that now. So it's more about not having to spend all your mana. It's more about, okay, what is my opponent doing, and how can I match that with just enough that I can pressure him, but not too much that he can get a great AoE or whatever removal would be good on that board.
Got it. So I guess my immediate question is for the people listening. It's obviously easy for everyone to quote run into the spear, right? Yeah. Which is just like, oh, I got a 2, I got a 3. It's like it's turn 6. It's like I'm just gonna drop everything I can on turn 6. I'm gonna drop everything I can on turn 7. But how do you evaluate what is like quote enough, right? Like how do you determine what is enough? Because on one hand, you do want to sort of push the game a little bit longer, just sort of always put enough out there. But at the same time, you always run into the danger of if you are consistently cutting a little bit too much, then suddenly you might find your life total being threatened, right? There's always a chance that they could like flip it on you, and you're just like, oh shoot, I probably should have tempoed just a little bit more in the past 3 turns. So I guess my question immediately is like, what is enough? Like, how do you know?
So especially when you are playing against the priest, like you still want to be ahead. Like it's not a great position to have the priest be on the board. That's never our goal, right? It's more, right. Do I need to spend my premium removal here to get just that tiny bit of extra advantage? I think we had that in the run we did on Friday. It was, yeah.
Yeah,
like where we didn't meteor, even though meteor was good and it was like clearly the best tempo move. We're just like, okay, let's hold back, let's use the hero power here, let's play the minion. And even though the net tempo was lower with that play, you were still sufficiently ahead. So it's more about I want to stay ahead, but I don't need to win like super hard. I just need to be enough ahead that I can pressure the priest, while at the same time, if I do get hit with removal, I can still refill. So that also means that even though you can play an additional big minion, maybe the opponent can mind control, and maybe that would be too bad. So maybe you hold back on that really big minion and pressure them with the 2 mid-range minions you have, instead of just like adding the huge minion, like let's say a Violet Worm and the priest is still on really high health. Like them mind controlling that can be a real problem. So then instead just holding that back and just playing, say a Spiteful Smith instead, and then having 2 to 3 mid-range bodies to pressure them with. Like we like this morning we got a 12 in Rogue, so that was like the perfect example, because Rogue is definitely not good at out carding people, and I think we had 5 good 5-drops and then 6 and a 7 or so. So that's a decent mid-range, but like it's not like a bunch of big minions. But I think especially if you're going to be more on the aggressive side of things, you really want to have a good mid game, because those are the, like especially when I'm playing priest, those are the games I lose when the opponent just keeps playing 5/5s, 6/6s. Those kind of bodies are really annoying to deal with.
Got it. So
yeah, I guess I think one of the more interesting things that I've noticed, with the co-op is like the not playing things part. right? Because I think of it as it's a counter meta. They have a mind control. I'm screwed here. I'm going to play less into it. But when given the choice between like playing into it and doing absolutely nothing because you don't have the cards, right? Like I think everyone, has a general sense of like, oh, don't play too hard into the board clears if you can do things like draw cards or do other things with your mana. Yeah. So the next step here that I definitely was not willing to take at anywhere near the frequency that you're willing to take is to actually just let a lot of your tempo just kind of go to waste and say, look, and this is especially true, and I feel more comfortable doing it as well when I have some removals in my hand. But oftentimes, even when you're holding like no removals, you'd rather have the opponent be on the board than to potentially play into these like potentially game losing counters. And I think that really just reinforces the resource battle against Priest, right? Like where you can't give them the actual counter. In fact, if you view it as if they have a mind control, I lose. If they have a Shadow Word Death, I'm doing very poorly. The odds start adding up, and you might as well just do nothing and hope you can whittle down their resources more until even if they mind control your worm, you can win. Like
it's like you say, it's more about a total resource war rather than just value or just tempo. Mm-hmm. So you need more looking at the big picture, right? Just counting your cards, counting their cards. It almost feels a bit more like constructed, right? Where you could have that war where just what they have, what you have, and you don't want to take certain traits because that in the end, gives you a worse overall value. Mm-hmm. Like that's why cards like Thought Steal and Devour Mind and stuff for me are super big right now, because those cards just give you like in a game where sometimes just passing is fine. Like being able to cast Devour Mind or Thought Steal is really really good alternative, of course.
So whenever the meta shifts to something like this, in which games are more drawn out and you have to pull back a little bit, right? How much does sort of your deck quality matter now? Because it's sort of two-sided. On one hand, the longer the game goes on, the more that the deck quality matters because you get to see more of the deck, right? But on the other hand, it also gives a player like yourself more opportunities to get smaller incremental leads, right? Like a little bit of card advantage here, sort of a good trade there, and then you also give your opponents chances to make mistakes. So I'm kind of wondering what's the balance here, like because I've seen a lot of people complaining that like, oh man, it's all about freaking deck quality now, which obviously is not true because if it's all about deck quality, then you wouldn't be averaging what you're averaging. So I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it is true that deck quality does matter, but I think you're now in a position, and I think most people do this to themselves, where they are stuck in this curvestone mentality and they will consistently make their deck worse in order to try and hit that curve. And then they'll complain that, the deck quality is worse. So I'm not saying that I just pick the best card every time, but I will just, I will sometimes have decks with 0 2-drops or maybe 1 2-drop. I'll just say, I don't see the value in playing something here, and I'll just go for like strong 3s, strong 4s, strong 5s, and I'll just start the curve a little later, especially when I'm playing a control class. When I'm playing a priest, when I'm playing a mage, I'll be much more inclined to just make up for that, because if you don't have any 2s or maybe 1 or 2 2-drops that preferably are pretty good later on as well, like an Ascendant or so, your deck quality automatically rises. Where like even though you might not have that crazy legendary, you might not have, that third scream or whatever that the opponent might have, you don't have those super dead draws in the late game. Like you have a bit more powerful 3s or 4s, or you picked an extra card draw effect, or you were able to pick an additional Shadow Visions, which might then get you another mind control. Like those are cards that we really started to like cards like Finders Keepers in this meta. Just because if I'm playing against an aggressive lineup, I can try and grab the Storm or the Volcano. If I'm playing against the control matchup, I'll try to maybe even get a Spellstones on Overload, right? But I might get an Earth Elemental or a 4-mana 7/7 or so, just some more substance to like put on the board and pressure with.
So are you not afraid of dying to like the aggro or tempo decks? Do they exist anymore? Like
yeah, I mean sometimes. It's I said this yesterday when I finished. Like I showed you guys the priest I drafted
Right.
with the two thought steals, two spell stones or whatever, and just almost no curve. If someone just goes perfect curve, they might just straight up destroy me. That's a risk I'm willing to take. I said that yesterday on stream. Like, well, I'm dead. I went from like 9-0 to 9-1 because I lost on like turn 6. Like I couldn't even scream. But that just doesn't happen often enough because most people aren't hitting those archetypes. I don't think very many people are trying to hit those super aggressive decks. So when it does happen, it's just unfortunate, but it's still a game of like averages. Right? So if what you do on average doesn't get punished, then that's pretty good. I'll also really prioritize good 3-drops. So even though you miss your 1 and your 2, landing a Tar Creeper, Lone Champion is amazing in my decks. Like it always procs. Like sometimes on Shaman, I'll just not totem and just be like, I'll just throw it out. Like yeah, I do that all the time. Like if I'm playing a slow Shaman, I don't totem and then I Lone Champion. And then if they play a 1 and a 2, and it's like a 2-1 and a 3-2, and you Lone Champion, it's pretty much an equalizer. It's nuts. So I feel like the benefit from curving out super hard usually doesn't outweigh the downside of making your deck quality a lot worse, and then obviously you're not always going to hit that curve. So sometimes you just get completely destroyed, but a lot of the time you'd be surprised how well you can hold it off.
But then in these cases, do you prioritize like the volcanic potions or the early game sort of like the cards that really do help you survive whenever you do have that matchup against like the lone hunter that still exists, or let's say like a tempo rogue? Like, do you still prioritize that?
Yeah, so when I'm playing priest, cards like Potion of Madness, Shadow Madness, they're super good. Maybe even a Shadow Word Horror, Holy Nova, Dragonfire, Scream, all those survival tools are still very good. That and premium 3-drops, like Tar Creeper, Lone Champion, those taunt minions, and Frost Rider still good, of course. So when I'm playing Shaman, early weapons are also good. Jade Claws, Stormforged Axe, those are still great. So I'll still pick the anti-aggro tools. I just won't invest in trying to hit the curve myself. Like sometimes it just happens where you get a couple curve minions, and then if you happen to hit them on curve versus an aggro deck, then you're in an amazing spot. But I'm not really gonna go out of my way to try and make the curve work, like the ones and the twos. But the anti-aggro stuff is still really important.
It's interesting. Have we seen any other meta that's been this sort of like slow or has necessitated this speed? Like I don't remember any that have been like this slow. There's been ones that have been like weird in that they're value oriented. And Shady, I remember like a year and a half ago you came on here and we were talking about like your Shady Mage, or what we call
yes.
Right? Yeah, where it was big, but you drafted small in order to draft a lot of big stuff. That's an inelegant way of kind of saying it, but
sure.
Like you cut out the Yeti, right? Or you cut out those mid things, and you drafted small in order to draft like a lot of Firelands portals and to draft a lot of like big things. So the size was definitely there, but right now it seems like we're just shifting everything later on. And like you said, you want the premium 3s and then the good 4s, but like sometimes you won't have any 2s, and then obviously you're going big, right? You're going real big, not just big minions. You're going for like Devour Mind, Thought Steal, that kind of stuff. Like Adulta, have we had anything like this big before, or slow? I don't know what the right
At
way.
no point was it slow enough that you would want to very regularly, if not like probably as often as not use your mana. Like it's gotten slow to the point where you'd want bigger cards so that you can use your mana, but regardless, if you had to choose between using mana and not using mana, it's like one of those 1 in 20 situations where you would actually rather not use your mana. But now this is like really seems like it's flipping, right? Like especially with the amount of priests, especially in the priest matchup. And not just the priest matchup, maybe there's also a lot of like other kind of very heavy deck matchups, right? Mage comes to mind. Warlock, depending on what you're like actually having on the board. Like if it's an empty board, you probably want to play stuff against a Warlock. But if you already have stuff on the board, Warlock has some devastating flips as well. I don't think it's been anywhere near this kind of like I think we hit some kind of tipping point, right? I think that's the best way to put it. Where and you felt it, right? Once KNC came along, you were like, there's too many tools. There's like Void Lords now. It's not just Steeds. It's like Steeds that are still there, and Void Lords, and the Primordial Drake is still there, and now the dominant class, even though it was Hunter, like it was still kind of a card advantage grind, and then they knocked Hunter down, and now it's like the most card advantage grind ever, right? Like I thought Priest wouldn't be as good now that Hunters are gone because they could always negate the Hunter hero power, but they're just thriving now in this. And like Shady, one of the interesting things is when I know you were always big on Priest, but you're actually kind of like stressed out about drafting dragons.
Yeah, that's true. It's funny because I do try to get some dragon synergy from time to time. It depends on what I hit early, but if I can avoid it, yeah, I will heavily consider not picking the dragon.
Yeah, and with Priest, dragons were like one of the core like things that came in this expansion, right? With Dustbreaker, with Twilight, whatever the 3-drop is, that outdoors and takes the attack. So even without like a heavy emphasis on that piece, like I think you've realized, and we've realized that with the combination of the dragon piece, just from observing and facing against these priests, that priests have gotten really freaking powerful. And it's because everything's just shifted back so far that the way to play against priests, and priests have like so many counters, that the way to play against them has hit this tipping point, right? This tipping point in the meta where before you're doing nothing 1/20th of the time. Now you want to be doing nothing like maybe a quarter, a fifth of the time. And that's like a huge difference. It's not like something you can look at a bunch of cards coming in and say, oh, the meta's going to slow down by like a turn or two. Like this is fundamental change in how to approach a class, and maybe more than one class.
Yeah, I think it also starts with just not being able to do it, because if you hit a deck with 6 to 7 twos, and they're in this case 3 twos, and you have a couple ones, then I think on average you can't draft as greedy as priests are doing right now. I can't do my stuff, but because it's so rare for someone to get a deck like that, I think that's really what's pushing the meta towards this direction, because it's once you realize you can get away without drafting the two, because that was the whole point of like quote unquote the shady mage before. Like I was drafting 1s, 2s, 3s to stay alive and then skip the mid game, draft all the big stuff I can. Now it's more like, okay, skip the 1s and 2s altogether. Just start on 3 to get even more, card draw and removal and big stuff.
The extra layer of greed has come in.
Yep.
Yeah, and in a way I do like that, because it changes the game, as in you need to really think for yourself rather than just go off what you've been doing so far. Just be like, oh, we draft a curve, we do this, we do that. It's more like observing the meta and saying, well, I don't need 2s, so I'm just not going to pick him. It's more like this instinct thing. I feel where people are picking them. Now, that doesn't mean that you should skip every 2 you meet. Sometimes it's just the best card in the pack. And certain classes do still want some 2s, of course. Like, so let's say in Rogue, they're good combo starters, like on turn 4 or so. Sometimes you just want 1 on 2 to pressure with. Warlocks can tap, so it's totally fine. Pick your 1s, pick your 2s, especially if they're librarians or homunculus. But yeah, it's different for every class. Like Shaman, for instance, I'm still keeping away from them, just because I feel like you have enough reactive stuff that you'll be fine, and you can totem on 2. It's totally fine.
No, even when I have 2s as Shaman, I found myself toteming on 2s way too often. And it's something that you would never do before if you had a 2-drop, to be like, oh, I would rather totem. Why? Because I'm playing in a style that I need to react to what my opponent plays on the board, and I have enough buffs now with KFT still in the rotation, and I have enough removals now with, all the new Shaman stuff that I can do things like this.
Yep, I don't remember like a time in which I would I played sort of it's not a game of chicken, but it would be like from turn to turn to turn, like myself and my opponent, we just like dare each other to like make the first real commitment, right? To like to do something real, and then the other person can actually like respond, and then like play, because removals are usually very efficient, right? Like their inflexibility and their reactiveness has a cost to it, and typically, like you remove something and then you're able to have excess mana on that turn to play something. And it seems so often, like when I'm playing someone, that uh, like one person is just always like punting, playing the Crystalline Oracle or playing a Gnomish Inventor, and then just doing this, Cabal Courier. You see that so often. And then no one's making any real commitment. And then sort of the first person to make a real commitment, that's like when the game begins. And sometimes, people are playing stuff, but the game doesn't even really begin until like turn 5, when someone's like, all right, fine, I'm tossing out a Scalebane. Let's see what happens here. But it's so crazy. Like when I look at my streams and just the number of runs, not even number of runs, number of games, because number of runs is a bad indicator if I go like 2-3, right? But the length of games is insane now, and the number of times I reach fatigue
the
is
length
ridiculous.
of the game right now. That is one of my least favorite parts of this new meta. Like, a run takes like 3 hours if I'm actually talking through my plays.
Right. And like, fatigue is a factor, sort of like reads are even more important. The skill is certainly allowed to shine through, but oh man, is it rough. And I cannot imagine if I'm like, first of all, I'm not going for the leaderboard this month, but I can't even imagine like, holy cow. I think it's going to take like almost twice as long as, a faster meta, especially, I don't know, just like normal, quote, normal KFT. Like this is probably at least 50-60% slower.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's not to say you can't play like just normal mid-range. I feel like you can always play mid-range in Hearthstone Arena, like normal mid-range.
Can you?
You can. I mean, I do fine. I play mostly mid-range still. Like, depending on the decks, I've found myself like leaning towards more like experimental and more. And by experimental, I mean synergy. Like, I go for a synergy and I hope I hit it. And sometimes I hit it and it works out, but oftentimes I like either don't hit it or I do hit it, but it's like the rest of my cards aren't good enough to support it. And they do okay. It's like 5, 6, 7 wins. I get a lot of 8, 9 wins also whenever I do things like that. So, like, I wouldn't say mid-range is like dead or anything. It's certainly not as rewarding as going control, and the downside of making a control deck is a lot smaller. It's a lot more limited now than it used to be. Because before you make a control deck, you don't have you don't have the early taunts, you don't have the volcanic potions and the early board clears and your potion of madnesses or whatever. You're just dead. Like, half your games, you're just dead. And so you can't, like, busting on control was a real problem. Here, you can bust on a control deck, end up with no 1, 2, or 3 mana cards, really, and you'll be fine in most of your games. Like, you will be given a chance to recover, right? And that just didn't exist in prior metas. So right now, playing, I wouldn't even call it control so much as just, like, greedy. Playing, like, a big, greedy, slow deck is definitely viable now. Not just, like, on I could make this really great deck that does this, but in if I just start trying to build this kind of deck, it's not going to hurt me too much, even if I don't end up like getting to my goal. So that used to be one of the big risks, I think, of going control with any class besides mage. And now it's just not as big of a risk anymore. Like the floor has risen, but it didn't affect what mid range is doing. Like, I feel like mid range gets crowded out a lot by like your 10 win, your 11 win. Like, at that point, you're like, oh, these decks are insane. Because the way to beat mid-range is control. Like, that's always been, like, you beat aggro with mid-range, you beat control. You beat mid-range with control, and at least in the arena, aggro will beat control because aggro will generally have more ability to have aggro cards than control will have control cards. So now that aggro is nearly not viable, you have fast mid range, slow mid range, and control. Your fast mid range is very iffy. Your slower mid range is still fine, but the good control and like large decks are going to eat you up, and they're going to be there at like 10, 11, 12 wins.
Yeah, Shady, do you find this to be like generally true?
Yeah, I think indeed that you can be fine just playing the slower mid range, right? Like, but I think if you want excellent right now, it's control is where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the only reason to not go control is when you either the draft really doesn't lend itself to it. Like I've had one of these Warlock drafts where I tried to force it and I made some really stupid picks, whereas I could have had a perfectly fine Zoo-ish mid-rangey deck with a little reach here and there, and I would have probably hit 7 or 8, but I really forced control and got like a 4 or 5. So it's you want to still read the draft, but as Adwokta says, it's just you don't get punished nearly enough right now for not hitting a premium control deck, whereas before you really needed all the tools to succeed. So when I'm playing Shaman, I think that's the one where it would happen the most, where you don't get the control. Like I think most of the time you get a control deck, but then if it doesn't work, you just make sure you have enough threats, and then you just end up toteming against priests and maybe get a good flame tongue. It's all about just pacing yourself when you're trying to kill them. Just realize you're still the aggressor, but just taking your time, getting a lot of extra free stuff. Because then if that's the downside of being on the board. If your opponent makes free stuff, you still need to use cards to deal with it. Like if you're playing against the paladin and he keeps making dudes, if you're against the shaman and he keeps making totems, like if you're off the board, you still need to AoE that, or you still need to Ocean Madness that, or whatever. So
yeah. So far, the style of play and sort of the meta and how it's been shaped. It feels like we've been talking a lot about priest, warlock, shaman, right? And a lot of what we said has applied to this.
Think, by the way, if those who are listening, we talk about Shaman because at least Shady and I have like a thing for Shaman right now, where I just think it's really interesting and potentially good. I think Shady thinks it's like a good class now too, but like in reality, I think the numbers aren't quite there yet. We're not saying like Shaman's actually a top 3 class or anything like that. I just don't want the listeners to get the wrong idea and they're like, oh, it's not Hunter anymore, it's now Priest and Shaman. Got it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the closest to priest is still like warlock, right? And we're putting shaman there just because I think shaman can play.
I think mage is definitely there. Like
really? Okay, yeah. I mean, this is what I was wondering about. I'm like, so what about these sort of other classes? Like, where is mage right now? And for me, it's like, where is paladin? Where is rogue? I'm especially curious about like those last 2 classes.
Okay, well, Paladin can't play.
Idea.
Paladin can't play
right.
like control.
Right.
You can't. So they're at a kind of disadvantage, but their cards are decently powerful, right? The Maul's great. Call to Arms we hate on, but everyone's giving us crap on it not being a super premium card. So if you're gonna try to play that as a super premium card, you're gonna need your 2s. So there's a whole playstyle attached to it, and it's not the best. It's definitely not unworkable, right? But that's like, I think that's definitely in one of the lesser favored areas right now. But like mage is great right now. I was going to talk about offering odds next, and part of it was flame strikes. I see flame strikes everywhere these days. I don't know if they got rid of the 50% bonus and just didn't tell anyone, or if like, I don't know, it hit some kind of breaking point that now that they fixed the spell offering rates, you just see flame strikes everywhere. But I play around flame strike now. I haven't played around flame strikes since like last year around this time. And now in KNC I'm playing around flame strike again, even though they added like plus 100% more cards.
Yeah, you play around flame strike and then the dragon thing hits you for 5 anyway. You get screwed.
But that's what I mean. Like, that's mages do that now, right? Like, the big spell mage is now a thing, and there's cost to drafting it in the arena, but people do it, and they play the odds, and it's not great if you're an infinite player to do something like that. But mages have a lot of good big spells, and you can stick like one small spell in there, and it's not catastrophic too often. And like the amount of times I see it in Raven hit is insane. Like, we underestimated it in the beginning because we screwed up, like, what other classes it's facing and things like that, and then we upped its rating based on now the statistical likelihood. But what's actually happening is by the time I see these mages when I'm at 5 or 6 wins or whatever, they are already the decks that have synergized and made it. So the Ravens hit like 80% of the time, in my experience, after 5 wins.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. So okay, well, like we talked a little bit about mage and sort of how annoying they are with their big spells, but yeah, I did want to get Shady's input on like the other classes, like the forgotten classes, because I have no idea where they are.
Cool. So I have no idea where to put Druid right now because I just
Okay,
have not had enough time to play everything.
that's fair.
I think Paladin is this solid class that won't do amazing, but like the quality of the cards is good because, like Adukta says, you're forced into or you're forced out of control essentially, right? You have to play either like a slower mid-rangey draft or like a more aggressive draft. Now, I have to say that the times I do lose to aggro, it's paladins. They play a 1, they play a 2, they play them all with Divine Shield, and you're just like, oh my god, I'm dead. And it's just too much. Right? So that does happen. So with Paladin, I still do pick some 1s, just because I feel like the 1 into the hero power is usually enough to get you there. I'm still not too big on 2s. I'll only pick like extra 2s if I do have Call to Arms, because I do think that when it hits, it's really good. But it definitely, it's weird in the draft. I feel like you need to really evaluate it. So Pally's like, fine, I don't think it's amazing. Rogue, I think, has potential, just because it's always been good against Priest. And like now, like I had a deck where I just could upgrade my Spellstone. It's funny, right? Because you would never imagine that playing 3 Death Rattles. Like I nearly upgraded it twice in one game.
Nice.
But just like very slow, just hold it, like playing Minstrel, playing Mimic Pot, just generation. It was funny. I was actually out carding priests, like almost, but it was like the early priests, right? Like going through the dregs. Yeah. So Rogue, I think, is fine. Warrior, surprisingly, has been okay, but I need more runs. Because I feel like Warriors like that, like whenever I meet a Warrior and I'm playing a like really slow control deck, I'm going to be very careful. I'm going to give him everything. I'm going to just throw my minions out there, like zero regard for value. Because I know that, if they deal enough damage and then suddenly spellstone you for 2 or for 3 golems and you don't have a Scream or Dragonfire, or, your Shaman, you don't have a Volcano, it can be, it can be really scary. Suddenly there's 15 damage on the board. And they might like equip a Reaper and then, there's 20 damage there. So Warrior to be respected, but I think if you expect it, it'll be fine. And then what else do we have? We talked about Priest, Warlock,
I think we talked about everything at this point.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
so
we've covered our bases on it. Druid, I think, can surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, but with the old cards, with the KFT cards and Ultimate Infestation, like if you get your cards, they can do pretty well just playing the normal control style that seems to be dominating, or the slow style that seems to be dominating K and C. Going more aggressively in mid-range in my experience as Druid seems like going mid-range on any other class. Like I don't think Druid has more advantages than other classes necessarily. So it's Druid, right? It's going to be a pretty normal class in most metas.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting, and I definitely agree. Whenever I see a warrior, after I would say like 6 wins, I'm just like, oh geez, this is a tempo deck, right? Like this is a deck that can flip it around quickly and just kill me extremely fast. And if I do have the deck, like if I have the triple volcano deck, right, I might feel okay with it. But if I don't have like all the answers in the world, I'm definitely not going to feel good about like missing turn 2 and potentially missing turn 3, right? Like you're probably just dead in that case.
Yeah. I mean, I think that probably plays into it because I've never had troubles with Warrior in this meta. Like, I can meet them at like the 10th win. I'm like, oh, it's Warrior. It's going to be a free win. Probably because I still build my decks more mid-rangey than Control, and Warriors may be more of a like their normal playstyle, like you said. Maybe that Spellstone card, maybe more of a counter to a more Control playstyle. I have like no experience having trouble with Warrior past like 3 wins. And when I'm playing as Warrior, it still feels really crappy to me.
Well, yeah, I mean they're not a good class, and then
Yeah,
whenever you
crazy.
see that Warrior, it's like that Warrior is always the product of like Darwinism, right? It's like that Warrior survived.
Yeah.
Anyways, Adder, do you want to talk about offering rates? I thought that was
Yeah, I want to add something about offering rates. So we had been speaking, like, we had been talking before about, something that was on Arena HS that Taro wrote back when the expansion first launched, that said that using HS replay data, it looked like there was no offering rate bonus in KNC going to neutrals. And there should be. So that's why we saw like very low amounts of like basilisks and whatever, and that sounded fine. Someone who analyzed the stats would seem like they're more credible than Blizzard, who doesn't say anything and messes up all the time on their offering rates. But as it turns out, so Taro wrote kind of a retraction on that, and I checked HS replay stats myself for the first time, like intensively to actually figure this out before his post, and then he made the post today. But it lines up, which is that the neutrals in KNC actually have had the offering rate all along. Like, or they had some kind of offering bonus. They had to have, or else the numbers wouldn't get there. But the main issue, I think, is that, and we know, and we've said it, the KNC neutrals are not terribly great for the most part, except for 3-drops, and so people just didn't see a lot of them. And I think a lot of people were probably underrating Basilisk a bit in the very beginning, which was skewing the like data from the first few days that he was using. Like, we came out and said it was the best card ever, and we have even knocked that down a bit after we caught a bug. We were for some reason giving Basilisks on the Lightforge tier list. We were giving Basilisks poisonous ability as if it had charge. Not the rest of the minion, just the Basilisk poisonous ability. So, that's not how the card works. So we caught the bug. And so that went down a bit, and we restructured poison a bit, making it a little more sophisticated. It's still like the best 3-drop. It's a 148 now instead of like a 200. So now it feels more fair. And it also points to, like, I realize I have like a lot of difficulty judging cards between 200 and 150. Like, it feels much more secure for me to figure out where a card is between 150 and 100. And I kind of know when a card's over 200. And Basilisk never really felt like it was over 200. It felt more like a 180. But, like, between the 150 and 200 range, it's really hard for me to, like, intuit, like, whether a card's a 190 or, like, a 165.
Yeah, I mean, look, because you're getting in the category of really good to really, really good, and it's pretty tough, and crazy stuff happens there, right? Like, you're basically trying to extrapolate card. Basically, like, you're only a few cards away from like Pyros, but the score can be really, really far apart. Freaking Pyros, man. So it's tough to judge. It's really tough to judge those.
Yeah, there's not as much experience as well, right? In that range, you have much more experience playing with the cards that are between the 150 100.
Right, but okay. Anyways, so the thing I really want to bring up about the offering odds, right? Like, just big picture here when we're talking about offering odds and offering rates. We can say like, oh, we see Flame Strike more often. We can see this. We can see that. Like, but the whole entire shift in the meta, like the whole entire reason we play the way we play now, or sort of Shady plays the way that Shady plays now, because I don't really have a style. Like, it would feel wrong for me to incorporate that. But like, the whole reason I think that Shady plays the way he plays now is just because of the change in offering rates. Like, previous to this, we had the Hunter meta, right, in which you could not, like Shady, I think you would agree with this. Like, you could not play this way, right? You couldn't draft, you couldn't play this way. Hunters, they certainly didn't go like super duper fast, and a lot of times they just like killed you with like flanking strike, and then crushing walls, and but you could not draft this slow slash greedy. Priests were always there, but hunters were king, and that really dictated how you played. And so for me, I'm just like, okay, they changed, these micro adjustments, these offering rates had such a dramatic shift on the meta. They not only had a dramatic change on the offering rates, which we have seen, but it totally took the meta and how you should play. Like,
it's a huge domino effect.
Right. It's a huge domino effect. And, we would see this effect, a change in the meta with a small offering rate change anyways. But, with these macro adjustments, suddenly the meta just like gets flipped on its head. And I don't know, like I'm wondering if this is the intention of Blizzard, but like, it's so crazy. Like, reading Shady's meta report, like a few weeks back, and then talking about hunters and how you should, you can beat hunters, and priest is there, warlock is there, and they're good, but everything is held in check by hunters. And then they flip the offering rates, and suddenly it's like, priest and warlocks and every single other class falls in line, and because of that, like, we have this new way of drafting and playing.
Yeah, I think it's enough to say that my main criteria for cards before the changes were like, how well do you deal with a 3/3 wolf? Because I had so many cards that I was just like, you suck against 3/3s. I'm not gonna draft you. Yeah, so it's almost like in Constructed, where people always hate on aggro and then no skill aggro or whatever, but there is a reason it's there. It's to make sure that you don't start drafting priests the way I do now, right? Just like, you get me 2 cards, you're better than the other 1 card. Yeah, nice. So it's just like, how can I get as many cards as possible, rather than how do I? Well, obviously I'm pulling it a bit out of proportion, but you know what I mean, right? You're no longer too afraid.
I'm at the point now where I try to limit my 4-drops. I never had to do that before. Why? Because 4-drops aren't big enough now. Where I'm like, I want my 4-4-drops for the curve, maybe 5, but if I have 6, I'm uncomfortable. I feel like I've just wasted the potential to have like 2 cards instead of just 1, like you said. So, like, I think at the 4-drop level, I'm now super concerned whenever I'm drafting, no matter what the class is, where I don't want to overstack on 4s, because 5s are better than 4s, 6 are way better than 4s. And my old rule in like KFT, for example, was about 5. Like, I didn't want more than 5 7+ mana cards, because then it gets to be too slow and cloggy and you can't play enough stuff. Like, it doesn't matter if the cards are big or not, right? It could be like an Arcane Intellect, which is bigger than any 7-drop, but it was at least playable, right? I could at least do something with it. Whereas a 7-drop, I like literally would have turns maybe where I can't do anything, and then I would instantly lose the game. And now I'm not concerned about that anymore. Like, the decks that I see you go like 12 wins with have like 8 to 10 7+ mana cards. Like, that's like an insane number. And why? It's because there are legitimately turns in games where you don't do anything. You just like hit the end turn button after you see the hero power with like 6 cards in your hand. And so if you're able to do that, then not having a playable card on a certain turn, or not having any options of what to play, isn't as bad anymore, right? Because you always have the option of passing.
Like, how many reactive cards do you have? Because I don't want to like give the listeners the wrong idea, like, oh, okay, just draft everything above 7, got it. Right? It's still like, okay, you do need your Shadow Madness, right, at some point to like stop them, or your Scream, or your Volcano, or your Storm, or if you're a Rogue, your Betrayal, or if you're Warlock, your Fellfire Potion. You still these cards are necessary, because the majority of the arena has not made the shift yet. They're still trying to curve out. They're just not doing it as well as they want to, just because the cards aren't being offered. But it's usually enough to just land 1 really good turn. Like with Warlocks, it's usually the Fellfire. With Priests, it's usually the Shadow Madness or Potion of Madness, or if you need to, a Dragonfire or a Scream, etc. You still need those cards. But yeah, like, if you have those cards, by all means, just start thinking ahead and be like, okay, So I've got the aggressors handled. Now I just need to make sure that if I meet another value-oriented dude, that I have more stuff than him. So that's usually what's going through your mind when you're drafting.
Yeah. And this is, I think it's really a testament to Shady's skill that he's sort of picked this up so quickly after the change, right? And I think this is a skill that is going to be pretty necessary from now on because I don't know how often they do these adjustments and whether or not they're on a regular schedule. I have no idea.
Oh, didn't you
But
hear? They've already done a change. The arena's completely different now. Nothing we've just said matters.
it's like as we're talking, it's changed twice already.
As
We've
we're
actually
talking,
missed.
Iksar is there hitting the button to like make the next round of changes go live.
We've actually missed an entire meta during the past 15 minutes. Like we actually missed the warrior meta. It was there. It was there for a whole 50 minutes. I'm sorry, guys. But I mean, I guess like the ability to adjust has always been important, but it's been important. Like we've always had some time. To adjust and then fine tune. Like Shady, I think you're really good at not only adjusting, but like fine tuning, right? Like you do a lot of testing, you do a lot of that stuff, you devote a lot of your time to it. Now, I mean, look, I'm sure you're going to keep on doing what you do, but for a lot of our listeners out there, like what advice would you give them, sort of in terms of adjustment period, knowing that it's like,
Yeah, let's
well,
say you're like a listener and you
right,
play the arena once every 3 days.
Well, I would definitely try to stay up to date by watching someone that does play a lot because like I made this point earlier on my stream where even though I'm enjoying this, I realize that I'm in a very luxurious position where I can play the game every day, multiple arena runs a day. If you are an above average player, but you don't get as much testing in as I do, I feel like you're really disadvantaged in this kind of a meta compared to, let's say, the casual player, because the casual player doesn't really do all this testing anyway. So he's just like, let's just go in, let's just see what happens. But he always has this attitude. Whereas now, the player who would normally do a bit more testing but doesn't have as much time as I do to just test all day, they're kind of on a level ground when it comes to their preparation. Like they can, the advanced player has a harder time of knowing what works. So I would say to limit the amount of classes you play. Like if you're trying to get as many wins, right? So you want to focus your attention on as few classes as possible because you have less time to figure out what works before they might change it again. So that's a big one. And then if possible, try to also limit the amount of archetypes like that. Like if you're, let's say you really enjoy playing everything, try to work on, okay, how do I play slower decks in this meta? So then, don't make your classes like I'm going to really, really focus on Hunter Paladin, but then also on Warlock and Priest, because the vibes of those two classes, or rather those two ways of playing, are very different, right? One is just trying to hold off and survive. The other one is like, okay, how do I have enough stuff? So that's usually where I would approach it from. Now, you don't always have that luxury of picking the class you want, but if possible, I would like limit the amount of classes and then preferably have the classes play in the same style, so you have a better feel for it and you get as good as possible at it before you change it again.
right. So I guess part of the reason I was asking this question because I like suddenly I understand how like the casuals feel, like no, because
Merps, suddenly a casual.
I know suddenly feels bad, man. But Adulta, like these days I mean I certainly don't play off stream. Do you play off stream?
I played like on average maybe like one run off stream, maybe two a week at most.
Right. Like these days, just because I've been so busy the past few months, right? I have played none off stream. So what happens now is I play, like I play Monday nights. Obviously, Sunday we have our one run, and I play Fridays, and then after that maybe a couple more runs here or there. But I'm playing, in total, the amount that a above, like a slightly above casual player would play, right? I would say. And yeah, like a lot of what I'm feeling right now is, I haven't completely adjusted to the post Hunter meta. But for me as well, like one of the immediate feelings, because I'm the type of person that, like, I want to perfect things. I want to get good, right? But for me, the feeling is just like, okay, well, the time I need to spend doing this, I'll perfect it, and then maybe I'll get like, I would have to put a lot of hours in, and then maybe I'll get like a week's worth of,
Yep.
quote, like dominance, before they probably change it again. And then all of my fine tuning, I would have to fine tune again. Certainly, I'm still building upon the fundamentals, which I have from like years and years of playing. But in order to really push it, and really understand it to a level that someone like Shady understands right now, I'm just like, I don't know if it's worth it, And if they keep on doing this, I don't know if it's ever worth it for me.
No, I mean, you just gotta wait another month. Like, they're gonna, because their idea is not like we're gonna keep pushing random buttons and shaking up the meta of the base arena. Their idea is we're gonna balance the arena. We just can't do it in one go. And so we're gonna keep doing it until it's balanced. And it's gonna end up balanced in their minds at some point, and then it's gonna freeze. And they're gonna have an event that's gonna interrupt the frozen period. All right? Like, I feel like that's what Blizzard's game plan is from here on out with the micro adjusts. Because they're not going to keep micro adjusting something that looks fine. If all the classes have a 50% win rate, they're not going to keep micro adjusting, right? Like, that's not their goal.
I mean, the problem I see whenever a new expansion comes out,
yeah, that's going to happen.
The timer starts. The timer starts. They have approximately 3.5 months, right? Like about 3.5 months, in order to fine tune it well. So what, like, they're always going to tune it here, tune it there. And then I guess how much time do I have in order to play the actual meta, right? Not just like beta test 1 meta, beta test 2 meta, which, you can call like the Hunter meta, like, the beta test 1. And now this is beta test 2 and it'll change. I don't know. For me, I'm just like, when do I actually commit, right? Like, if I want to go for the leaderboard again, when would I commit to it?
Yeah, I mean, even when they weren't tinkering with offering rates as much, they still did this like mid-season reduction in offering rates of the current expansion, which also like shakes things up. Yeah. So like Adwokta says, I do think that it's not their idea that they just go like, oh, let's just shake things up to shake things up all the time. I think they are indeed looking for a certain kind of balance, and then I hope that once they reach something that's acceptable for them, they have this formula where they have an easier time doing it each expansion. So it's a couple of weeks of just volatility, just anything goes, and then after that it's somewhat stable, and then probably like halfway through another reduction in offering rates of the current expansion to. I mean, I'm not sure if they do this because people complain when they go like, oh, I see so many bone mares, I never want to play arena again. I'm just like, all right, just reduce the number of bone mares offered. Like, I don't know in what extent they listen and base their changes on that. Because for me, it feels kind of arbitrary to just say, all right, halfway down, let's just change the number of cards you get from the expansion. Because I'm with you, Merps. I would enjoy like the farm time more. Like, I would love it if I could figure everything out. And,
the farm time,
right,
I love it.
Right.
Yeah, right. It's just like 2 months of solid farm time. Like, I know everything. Let's just go. Let's like get all that gold, add it to the pile. But
yeah,
I mean, this has its charm, yeah. Because I think for me, I just needed to switch from trying to perfect it to just be like, okay, let's just do as much as I can and remind myself that anyone else is going through the same thing. Yeah. I think if you're comparing it to, I used to be able to figure it out so, more expertly. And I just go like, well, other people aren't doing it anyway. So, I'm just doing the best I can, and I just need to still just do better than others. I think that's the main thing. Like, if you could frame it like that, I think it's fine. But yeah, like Adwokta says, I do think in, this expansion at some point, they'll be fine with it. And then next expansion, I hope that the transitions keep being smoother and smoother.
I also think that, while you may feel like everything's getting, a bit too wonky and you can't perfect it, I think most people would actually think, oh, meta changing is a good thing. Meta changing frequently is a good thing. It prevents, like, even people who are kind of casual, they don't necessarily want to go back to the same arena every other day. They may want the arena to keep changing even if it is Blizzard pushing random buttons, as long as it's not screwing it up too much. And Blizzard's pushing buttons to make win rates go closer to 50, so it's not going to be like a terrible effect. And I don't know how much most people would care about the stability of things the way people like us who want to analyze things very precisely would prefer. Like I've said this before, I enjoy the hunter meta. I enjoy this priest meta. Like I don't know too much more about these metas than I think most people do because we don't know what the micro adjust offering rates is exactly. Like we have a better idea than most people. I shouldn't say I don't know more than most people in the arena about where the meta's at. But it like when the hunter was starting, what did I know? I knew the new cards, right? That was like my edge. I knew how the new cards were going to interact with stuff. And then I knew the one thing that everyone knows, which is hunters are everywhere and they are insane. And it's all about secrets, flanking strike, and playing the spellstone, right? It was like a very clear hunter setup. And Call of the Wild is, just running rampant. Like I knew that from playing 1.5 arena runs. It did not take me a ton of effort to figure this out. Like I read a forum and I played 1.5 arena runs and I'm up to date on the current meta. And then when it switched, it was instant, right? Like everyone was like, "Whoa, what happened? Hunter changed. Hunter had to have changed." I'm like, "Okay, I guess Hunter changed, right?" And then we all were realizing kind of the same thing. We didn't get as far as Shady did in the whole like, oh, you actually don't need to play cards at all on a turn like area. But we were all slowing down, playing more control. Like, and I think that's fine. That's fun, at least for me. And I do hope the meta settles eventually. But when Shady was talking about that reduction, like when the class offering bonus goes away, right? Like at that period, like that's the period. Like maybe the month after that thing happens is going to be your stable one. Like that's going to be when you want to focus and try hard and like use all the stuff that we normally do. So
yeah, that change is usually not as big though as the stuff that's happened now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
thankfully, right?
Yeah, and it's much more predictable because you know what's happening.
Sure.
All right, cool, good stuff. I guess we'll just have to wait until that period. But for now, like I think we've gotten some pretty good advice from Shady on how to navigate the current meta, and Druid is yet to be seen.
Oh, the one class we didn't talk about actually. After you started talking, I realized this: Hunter.
Oh,
that's the missing class because you were counting in your head, and I could tell you're like, we're missing a class. I'm like, we're never gonna figure this out because I've played this game before where I can't remember a Hearthstone class. And then it takes me like 10 minutes to remember the last one. But it's Hunter. That's the one we did not talk about.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like it's two-sided, right? Like first of all, it's hard to go back, man. Like you've been so spoiled, and now it's like, ugh, what is this? Like, ugh, like you've had this insane Hunter drafts, and also I feel like Hunter just doesn't do well against Priest right now, just not at all. Like I feel like I don't know, maybe it's just a couple runs I've had, but I feel like with Hunter, you're really playing the game like, please high roll my draft, please Ben Bros, because like otherwise it feels like you're not doing much. Like even Warlocks, like they just hit one spellstone and you're like, well, I'm never getting him.
Yep.
That's I'm not enjoying it currently, so I'm kind of staying away from it.
Staying away from it so hard, it's even out of your mind as a class. Like warrior style, no longer an option.
It's so sad. Because with Hunter, you not only need the good small cards, you need just like you have to hit your small cards and you have to hit good small cards, I feel. Because it doesn't really matter if you're sort of like your mid/big Hunter cards are that good. It's like your hero power is useless, and no matter how good your mid/big cards are, they're never bigger than Priest. It's like you can have something big, but when the Priest mind controls it, well, you lose. It's like it's one of those things where I need the Alley Cats and Crackling Razor Mauls, but I'm just not getting them. And if you don't get that, I'm like, well, okay, I basically lose to all the other control classes. And you know what the worst feeling is, Shady? I lose to Warlocks now as Hunter. That's the worst feeling.
Void Lord changes the game, man.
Not just Void Lord either. Like stupid vulgar homunculus. I'm just like, oh come on, like those taunts, and then their spellstone, right? Like the lifesteal spellstone, it's pretty easy for them to upgrade it, and then suddenly 7 damage to one of your minions, and then they lifesteal, and you get them down a little, and you're like, okay, this is fine, like everything's all right, and then they drain life, and then drop the 4 mana 7/7 taunt, and I'm just like, oh, okay, not enough.
Yeah, no, it's this thing where I do it with every class now, where I need to catch myself because it's years of just conditioning. Like Warlock goes low, go for a kill, right? It's this thing in your brain, this trigger, right? Just go for it, just push them down, push them down. But now they just suddenly, like you said, they heal for 7 and then the drain life on top. That's +9 health. You're just like, whoa, this is a lot more than I thought. So even though they dip lower, I pace myself. I'm just like, okay, let's just assume that he's going to be able to heal out of this. I'm not going to suddenly, drop my guard and go for the kill, because then suddenly, like you said, they drop the 7/7, then they heal up. You're locked out of the game. You went for a tempo plan when you could have out controlled them, and yeah, you end up losing. So yeah, it's true. Warlocks are very resilient right now.
It's so disgusting because I never thought this day would happen when I wouldn't say consistently be beaten by Warlocks as Hunter, but it's no longer the matchup in which I'm like, oh man, like this is tilted in my favor. Right now, I'm just like, I don't know. It depends on his draft. He certainly has the tools now to hold me off and just eventually win. It's pretty disgusting. Like, because you always had that in your back pocket when you drafted Hunters previously. It's like, well, at least if I face any Warlocks, man, I am in a really good spot. And we don't even have that anymore. Sad.
Or even mages, right? Used to be free kills, and now because we don't have the early game, it's definitely not a free kill right now.
Right, and they just have so much annoying stuff now, like the 2/6 minion that gives them the mirror.
Yep.
Like that thing is so annoying. As Hunter, they play that, and then they play the mirror images. I'm just like, wow, that actually just stops like 7 damage. That's really freaking annoying. And they just punt one turn, and then next turn they have control of this 2/6 minion, and they can freeze. They could just do whatever they want, and really annoying.
So you remember saying back like a couple weeks ago and like a few months before that and like a couple years before that, if Priest is ever the best class in the meta, the arena has gone to hell. Or something like that equivalent. And we're at the point now where the Priest is definitely number 1, number 2, number 3ish, right? Like, I don't care who you are, you see what's happening, right? You get, like, when I get to like 5-0, 6-0, all I see are priests at that point. It's like 75% plus priests. So at least that's how it is, for most players. I think that's how it is for Infinite players now too. And again, not because of the dragon synergies, but just because the game is so slow now that priests are not punished for being priests and doing their like, I'm going to hold all these counters and wait until you play into me and then you lose in matches like game. Like now they have all the counters. They can draw all the counters. They don't get punished by tempo as hard. So what's your analysis of the meta right now? Like we've been focused on like how to beat the meta, right? Like I think Shady set it up very well. Like here's a bunch of priests. Here's how you beat priests. And that also tells you how to play as priests. And then we evaluated how each of the classes kind of does in this particular meta and what their tricks are. But like overall, in this meta for however long we still have it before Blizzard nerfs priests.
I hate it. I do not enjoy the length of games. For me, it's not just about how I win it's not just about whether I win or lose. It's about how I win or lose, right? And I just, at a certain point, it does feel bad. And like, is there a lot of skill in this meta? Sure, of course there's a lot of skill. I think there's a lot of skill in any meta. You just sort of shift the skills that are most applicable for the meta, right? But yeah, it's a bad feeling meta, in my opinion. And I know Adukta, I think you feel very differently. Shady definitely seems to be enjoying the meta, but for me, I'm just like the length of games, along with just like how I'm losing. I just and Priest is just the most annoying class by far. Like their cards and how they beat you, and then like whether I'm playing aggro and then they just have the board clear, I get annoyed at that. And then if they beat me after a long control game, and then at the I'm just like, all right, well, that was a great 25 minutes of my life,
That is the one part I hate about this meta. I will not give that, like, that's horrible. But I don't know. I've kind of leaned into the RNG that's inherent in KNC, right? Like, I thought it was going to be worse than it is. It's definitely a step up from what we're used to seeing, especially with KNC being one of the least RNG expansions ever. So now I feel like we're kind of back. I'm just like, once like some stories or like some novels or whatever, they're really good, but you have to like buy into the initial premise that it's like totally outlandish and stupid and would never happen, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's where I think we're at right now. Like, you gotta buy into this whole premise that, like, you're just gonna lose these games against priests. Like, some of them. And you're in this place where you are playing until fatigue, not an infrequent amount of time. And try to work from that standpoint. And it's pretty interesting. Like, it's such a serious shakeup that for now, it's overcoming my... Because I share your distaste for having to face priests all the time and what they do. But for now, assuming that they are going to nerf priests soon, I'm still enjoying this meta.
Yeah, it's like Adokta said, you have to lean into it, you have to embrace it. I think if you don't, it's a terrible meta. If you fight it, if you're like, no, I will not partake in your priest circle jerk, right? It's just, I won't do it. Then yeah, you're gonna suffer. It's I feel like you either play the control and play the really like greedy anti-priest stuff, or don't play at all right now. It's not a great experience if you're gonna try to go aggro, try to hunter him down.
Disgusting. You guys disgust me. Shady, you have turned away from...
I've changed, man.
Yeah, you changed, man. You used to be cool.
I used to be green.
All right.
There's always next time.
Let's do Car Good Bad. Car Good Bad is the one that Shady picked, and I love this pick because we covered it a little bit when we were co-oping. I was like, huh, really? I guess I'll try it out next time, but I have not gotten a chance to try it out. Car Good Bad this week is Feral Gibberer.
Gibberer.
Which I always pronounce Gibbler like Kibler for some reason. But it's Gibberer, and we rated a 66.
Gibberer.
Gibberer, not even Gibberer. Gibberer.
No,
Gibberer. Okay. Feral Gibberer, which is a 1-mana 1/1 neutral card. And whenever it attacks, you get a 1-mana 1/1 Gibberer that has the same ability into your hand. So we rated a 66, which is really bad. It's a point below Shield Bearer, a couple points below Goldshire Footman. It's below Snow Flipper Penguin. Like, it's below basically any one drop you would like seriously consider playing. And Shady, I'm assuming you think it's a bit better than that.
Yeah. So I have to be honest, like at the start, I was completely in the same position. I was like, wow, this is such a troll card. And then Taro was in chat and was just begging me to take it. It was like, please take it. You'll see it's really not that bad. It was like, okay, we'll try it out. And then I think like one of the first games I played it on one, and I'm like, oh my god, like it went crazy.
How many did you get?
8+ or so.
Jeez.
I was at the point at one point where I had to like attack first with them because I was at 10 cards, so I like mill the Gibberers and then play my stuff so I wouldn't overdraw. So it does happen, those things. So I think the reason why is that in general, I'm not really, like in most classes, right? I'm not really looking for ones, but obviously if you land your 1/1, you'll take it. Mm-hmm. It's fine. You just don't pick him because it lowered the overall quality of the draft. Now, the Gibberer like is still a big threat if it's big. You know what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Like, if it does go off, you have pretty much unlimited 1/1s.
Right.
So in a meta where we constantly skip turns and pass, having a free thing to do, it becomes a lot better. So instead of like one of the penalties for this card, I assume, is like even if it goes off, you're still paying 1 mana for 1 mana, which is not amazing. But if that mana would normally be wasted anyway, that's pretty good. So suddenly you have a free way of pushing the opponent and forcing them to do stuff to kill cards that aren't actually cards. So you can pair this with, say, a Basilisk and say, okay, choose which one are you going to ping, a Basilisk or a Gibberer, or play it against the non-ping class, play it against the priest when they don't have when there's no minion next to it, so they can't push the madness it. Against the warlock if they don't have the coil in hand, the stray hunter that can deal with it. So there's definitely moments where it goes off. And if it doesn't, it doesn't, and it probably just takes as many resources, if not more, than another 1-drop to be dealt with. So I would say that in this meta, it's not as important to get the stats out on turn 1, and it's a threat. It needs to be dealt with. Otherwise, you just have unlimited 1/1s for the rest of the game.
Okay, Gibberer or a Igneous Elemental?
What
assuming like the elemental tag is not terribly important, like not mage or shaman, I guess. So let's just say priest.
I'd probably pick the Gibberer. Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, like I'm not 100% on that one, but probably yeah, just because of the potential.
Yeah, so the potential is outweighing the like guarantee of 1/2s no less, not even 1/1s, but the potential for it to go off and be like very difficult to deal with. Whereas the Igneous, you kind of just leave it there; it's not going to do much.
Yeah, but yeah, it also is like the Igneous can get Potion of Madness or Shadow Madness, and then they crack it anyway. So it's like it's like I'm down on Basilisk, but like earlier today I skipped the Basilisk for Scalebane, where I'm just like, yeah. I kind of don't want to get potioned on this thing. But that was because I was playing a more aggressive deck. So.
That's fair. Okay. It's cool. Gibberer, I will say I don't think I've drafted it yet. That will probably change. Although, if we're playing in the way that... Actually, this is my question. Because Gibberer seems to be a card that kind of goes against your sort of archetype. Right. So do you is it really just like, well, I have nothing better to pick, so I'll pick it, or does it actually fit into, does it actually fit a role?
Yeah, it's not something that is it's not a centerpiece of a strategy or anything, but it's something to do with the mana, and it's a threat. So I would say against mage, like it's a bit awkward, right? Because you're gonna play it, it's gonna get pinged. But you have such a good, like if you're a priest, right? You have such a good matchup already that it's fine. If you're a warlock or so, you can definitely make up for the lack of quality. So there, it's also fine. You have your life tap. I would say that it ironically becomes more of a problem when you're playing a class where every card does really matter a lot. So if you are trying to push the warlocks and the priest, I think it becomes worse there. But I think for the control classes, it's more this privilege that they have that they can pick it up without having too much downside. And you force the other guy to do something about it. Otherwise, it goes off, and suddenly the control class keeps playing 1/1s, especially in the mirrors, right? In the mirrors, if you're baiting each other to play stuff, if you can constantly play 1/1s, that's really annoying for them, because especially if you hold back on a few, if you don't put them all on the board every time, then even if he AoEs, you can play another couple and start to add to the pile of Gibberers.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, I would say do yourself a favor and just try it out. If anything, it's hilarious when it happens.
That's fair. I don't even... I'm sure I've heard it like multiple times. I can't recall like its battle cry or its sound off the top of my head, and maybe that needs to change. Maybe I just need to embrace the little fuzzy like gremlin thing that it is.
It's been effective against me 0 times, and it has been effective for me 0 times in the one time I had to pick it, because it was like kind of forced on me. And I think it was a 100 too. Like And it did not do anything for me. But again, super low sample sizes, and I'm sure my opponents were not the super greedy decks that we're doing now. So it is interesting though, right? Like that is because you're taking such a greedy deck, you actually are okay with this one drop. Because the one drop does actually potentially get you a lot of what you want. So its downside and upside is actually working better for a greedy deck than a more aggressive deck.
Yep.
Yeah, because its ability is card advantage. It's not a terrible amount of tempo, and it's awkward. Like it's meant to be awkward.
Yeah, if you time it right, like even when they can deal with it, at least it's like you've played a 1/1 taunt.
Mm-hmm.
Like okay, you'll have to trade into this, and you'll have to leave my Shrieking Shroom. Like that's something I paired with sometimes. Where I played those two on turn 4, I'm like, you can only stop one, right? Right, and then some they go for the Shroom, and then there's like, wrong choice, buddy, and then the gibberish just go off, and it's pretty fun.
All right, so any other questions, Merps?
No, I think this was good. It was very helpful. I thought it sort of really helped me with the understanding of the current meta, right? Like I said, I don't play that much nowadays. I certainly felt a bit lost during this meta, or not really lost. Like I knew sort of what steps I needed to take, and I needed to just, get some reps in.
We helped you go through the stages of grief,
right?
Within this podcast.
And I am just hoping that they micro adjust Priest into Oblivion where they belong, or at least just not number 1, because.
So here's the thing with Priest, right? Like they haven't been micro adjusted. They've never been micro adjusted. Like they've always been like, even when the other classes were moving, this was always a pretty normal class that people did okay with. The meta shifted to them, and they got powerful cards.
And the meta shifted them because of micro adjusts in general. Yes. I'm not saying
yes.
But yeah, micro adjusts caused this.
Definitely. But it didn't cause it by raising them. It caused it by destroying everything else. In fact, right now, I think Shamans and Warrior are the only classes micro adjusts are actively helping. It's hurting almost every other class.
Yeah,
right. Shaman's loving it. Sure.
All right. Well, we are about to play a mage in the arena coup. So, you got any advice for us, Shady? I know we did a co-op mage. So we kind of got a good feel of it. But any specific mage drafting advice, maybe?
Yeah, so I would say keep your eye open for what we did play. I think that is the standard. But if you do get enough burn offered, it is really nasty to just, like if let's say you got 2 fireballs, a portal, like you can definitely go that way as well, where you just push people, and then they may have taunts, they may have removal, but they can't remove your fireballs to the face.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a deck I recently had, which was a pretty easy 12, where I had 3 fireballs, and I'm just like, okay. Or I just had so many games, and I'm like, well, you would win this game if it weren't for my 12 damage to the face right now. So yeah, and it happens. Like it's not crazy unlikely, as what I was talking earlier. Like you do get Pyroblast offered, you do see it. So let's say keep your eye open for the burn, but usually you're just gonna want to have your game plan where you want to hold off aggression and then have enough stuff to beat Priest. So like Courier, Kabbalist Tome, just enough card generation that you're not necessarily out carding them, but that you're going to have so many threats that they run out of ways to deal with your threats, and then you can kill them.
Sounds good. We'll see which way the draft heads in a bit. Anything else you wanna leave us with, Shady, before we go off into Mage Land, where we try to force a mage to compete with a priest in this meta?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, right? The Raven is pretty fun. Like especially in the draft, I try to also look at the cost of my spells, because you do get Dragon's Fury, I believe it's called. So the AoE. So sometimes I will avoid taking an extra cheap spell, or like maybe a secret, because I already have this Dragon's Fury. So yeah, in general, try to not worry too much about the curve. Try to monitor your your removals and then base your curve off that, right? Whether you can be greedy, whether you do need to early game. Other than no, just have fun and ping Gibberers.
Watch, we're gonna end up with a Gibberer. It's gonna happen, and it's gonna be like.
I'll watch the draft for sure.
All right. Well, that's it from us, I think, Merps.
Yeah. So Shady, thank you so much for the info. If people want to see more of you, learn more of you, where can they find you, man?
On Twitch, it's just twitch.tv/Shadybunny. And on Twitter, it's at F2K_Shadybunny. So.
Awesome. All right. So I'm sure we'll have Shady on quite a few more times this year. Like basically we just have him do the work, and then we have him on the show to present it, and it's like, oh yes, of course, this is the way we play it. Anyways, Shady, super appreciate it. Thank you so much, man.
Hey man, it's great. Thank you for having me. I always enjoy these.
Until next time, this is Adwicta.
This is Merps. Good luck in the arena, guys.
See ya.
All right.
Okay.
That is that.